5'2", eyes are blue, what those 5'2" could do. Has anybody seen my gal? Turned up nose, turned down hose, flasher, yes sir, one of those. Anybody seen my gal? If you run into 5'2", covered with fur, diamond rings and all those things that you like, that isn't good. Could she love? Could she woo? Could she could? Anybody seen my gal?
We are privileged to have the Grace Notes Chorus start us off its song.
We are delighted to be here. We're a new community chorus for people living with dementia, community members or family care partners, caregivers. So we have a few songs planned for you today. You're going to love the songs. So you're going to start singing with us, and you can do that because they're old familiars. I'd like to introduce Amy, who is a music therapist, our director, and Kelly, our pianist. So thank you so much. I think we're ready to go. Yeah.
I'm not going to sing. Well, I will.
And she knows all the words. I have not met her before today. She's not a plant, like she's got it. See if you can pick her out. You can't.
Good afternoon, everybody. And invite the folks standing in the back to find a seat. There are plenty of seats in the auditorium to my right, and I'd love to have you be comfortable. My name is Bill Henrich, and I'm the president of UT Health San Antonio. It is my delight to welcome you, welcome all of our San Antonians, but welcome all of our visitors from around the country who come for this two-day scientific symposium that will start tomorrow to a typical San Antonio winter day. I just want to say to all of you who are visiting from outside of the city, this is what the weather is like year-round. I promise. A warm welcome, sincere warm welcome to all. Thank you for being here today. And I hope today's discussion is enlightening and serves to bring everyone up to date on the state of the field in neurodementia, and that your questions, whatever they are addressed adequately. I want to express particular thanks to our out-of-town visitors headed by Dr. Maria Carillo, Chief Scientific Officer of the National Alzheimer's Association. She's a member of the National Council on Aging, and she holds several other important national roles. And she's sitting here in the beautiful purple dress. Maria, welcome to you. We're glad to have you here. Well, a bit of background for those of you who don't know it. The inspiration for the establishment of the Glenn Biggs Institute for Alzheimer's and Neurodegenerative Diseases came from Mr. Glenn Biggs himself. He was a very well-known and highly respected member of our San Antonio community, very much a leader, who died from Alzheimer's disease in 2015. And he foresaw a place where patients and families could receive precise, expert diagnoses, superb patient care, access to leading-edge clinical trials, a strong research foundation in the basic sciences, and support, importantly, support for caregivers and families, and a place that would educate the next generation of caregivers, so that the generations that follow us would have superb care. Now, if you've looked around for such places that I've just described in America, you will find that they are few and far between. They're not easy to find, in part because the clinical reimbursement model for reimbursement for cognitive illnesses doesn't support adequately the necessary time that's necessary to invest in a patient with complicated problems like this and a complicated history like this. So in order to achieve Glenn's vision for a comprehensive center, we started as a first task on the challenge of raising endowment funds that would offset the operational costs of taking care of this cohort of patients. 3 years ago, we had no idea what the community's response to a need like this would be. San Antonio is the most beautiful and greatest city in the United States. But it's not the richest city in the United States. It isn't the richest city in Texas. So we began this effort with our hearts in our throats, but with spirits high that we would be successful. With a lead gift from the J.M. Barker Foundation, and thanks to the support, the important support at the beginning of this journey from Ben Barker, who's a member of our development board, and with strong support from the community and from Ann Biggs and the Biggs family, I am pleased to say, ladies and gentlemen, that we raised in 2.5 years over $40 million in endowments, cash, and capital funds. And with these resources in hand, we began to search for the right leader, someone who had the content expertise, the energy, and the passion for Glenn's vision so we could make it a reality. Someone who could assemble the complicated components necessary to build a leading national and international venue for patients and families to come. Now, these attributes we have found, we needed basically someone who was equal parts a miracle worker and an angel. And we found both of these attributes residing in full flower in Dr. Sudha Seshadri, a leading international expert in neurodegenerative diseases, especially Alzheimer's disease. And I'm proud to say we recruited her from Boston 14 months ago. And in that time, the place has been literally and figuratively on fire. She has fully and passionately embraced the vision and the foundational team and pieces that we had in place, including the highly accomplished Bar Shop Center for Longevity and Aging, which was a national center, a decorated center that had been here. She quickly built a superb team of researchers and caregivers and has guided the initial vision to become reality. And here we are today on this sunny San Antonio afternoon on Sunday, launching our first South Texas Alzheimer's Conference that has drawn many of our nation's top leaders to San Antonio. Like virtually everybody here, especially this audience, I know that we can, and from my perch as a physician and investigator, I view the scourge of these diseases, these neurodegenerative diseases, from the personal perspective and from the scientific perspective and as well as public health perspective. It's true that the numbers of affected people in our country is prodigious today and will grow even more so in the future. That the cost of treating these individuals is enormous and a barrier to care for many, and that the lack of resources that exist in all sectors of our society make for an alarming picture. But behind the numbers, behind the public health problem that Alzheimer's disease presents, there are people. People whom we've lost, like Glenn. Like many of you in this audience have lost. People whom we are actively losing today. In my family, today, we are suffering from the effects of this disease and feeling these losses acutely. But I take solace in the fact that the key to defeating this illness, like every other illness, every other scourge that's been defeated, will come from basic and clinical science, from facts which emanate from the hard work of investigators, some of whom you'll hear from today. And the work that is now progressing here and around the country, indeed around the world, should give us real hope that in the not too distant future, breakthroughs which will lead to new therapeutics will be found. And while we have legitimate cause to have this hope, it's important that we not lose our resolve, that we not stop the effort, that our energy be unwavering in this fight. And I pledge and I promise that our institution, like many others around the country, won't stop. We won't stop until we've won, until we beat this illness. So today I hope you get some flavor of the optimism and the resources and why there's legitimate reason for hope. My task is to now introduce Ann Biggs, Glenn Biggs' widow. She has been my partner, I think it's fair to say, in every stage of this effort. The adjective would certainly describe her as unwavering and steadfast, and she's been terrific in every call we've had along the way. So if you would please, I'd like you to give a warm welcome to Miss Ann Biggs.
Isn't this an exciting day? I think the gods have smiled on us, given us the beautiful weather here on the banks of the San Antonio River in this beautiful facility here. I want to thank all of you for coming here today. I never imagined that Glenn's vision could come this far in this short a time. But it's because of so many of you who have stepped up, then who gave that initial gift to get the ball rolling. And then others, to Dr. Henrich for bringing Dr. Seshadri to San Antonio. And can you believe in less than 15 months all that she has done to make this institute a reality? It couldn't have been done anyway. And I know that today that Glenn is smiling in heaven and saying, keep going, keep going. You've just begun, and there's still so much more to do. So I thank each of you so much for being here, for all of your support, the money you've given, the help, the encouragement, the staff that Dr. Seshadri has assembled here. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And my family, my sons are both here today. We are grateful to all of you. Thank you.
I described a moment ago our fearless leader, Dr. Seshadri, as part angel and part miracle worker. And since I'm not lying about the weather, and I don't lie about anything, those things are immutably true. She came from Boston, where she was a leader in that institution, led the neurodementia section of the famous Framingham study in Boston, and over the years has assembled an impressive record of achievement in both clinical and basic science of this disease. We were fortunate to get her, and I told her when I first met her that I needed a partner to help me do this, and believe me, I hit the jackpot. So please, if you will, welcome our fearless leader, Dr. Sudha Seshadri.
Fellow San Antonians, I'm still working on my Texan, but I'm Texan in spirit. I want to thank President Henrich and Anne for your vision, for inspiring me, and for every day being a support. Anytime I do something, Anne is there with family. We've had these dialogues on dementia in the medical campus. This is the first time we're having it in the Tobin, and she's been there. And I meet with President Henrich all the time. He just wants to know, how can I help you? How can we grow this together? This is the generosity, the vision that each of you has helped establish, and it's my honor and privilege with a wonderful team that's growing by the day to take steps to make this a reality. Today, the first step is the inaugural meeting of the South Texas Alzheimer Conference. We are starting off with a public event where we have a very distinguished panel. I want to thank, first of all, friends who have come from all over Texas, friends who have come from every corner of the country, and from all over the world. We have colleagues here from Greece, from Barcelona, from Bordeaux, from the Netherlands. Thank you to all of you. Thank you also to the sponsors of our conference, the Alzheimer Association, the Darrell K. Royal Fund. We have here Rita Hortenstine, who's the president of the fund and of the Texas Council for Alzheimer's and Related Diseases. Would you like to say a word? And we have as well Professor Gladys Maestre, who is my partner down in the valley at the UT Rio Grande Valley. And we had support also from the UTHSA, from UT Health San Antonio, and the President's Fund of UT Health San Antonio, as well as from the San Antonio Life Sciences Institute, or SALSI. So a big thanks to all of you, because without you, this today would not have happened. Thank you. I'd also like to thank Carol White and the Grace Notes for starting us off so wonderfully. This afternoon we have a panel. We are very fortunate that none other than David Martin Davies of TPR and our source is going to lead the panel. In a discussion, we're going to have first 3 brief talks by distinguished speakers on different aspects of preventing dementia. And then we have collated a lot of your questions, and we will go through those and answer them. If we are not able to get to all the questions, we will get back to you with answers or post them in our website. I will get to the panel in a minute, but before that, I want to thank our strong collaborator nationally and right here in South Texas, the Alzheimer Association. I'd like to invite Meg Barron, the Regional Lead and Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Association, to introduce you to our next speaker, Dr. Maria Carillo.
Thank you all for being here today. My name is Meg Barron, and I'm the regional lead for the state of Texas for the Alzheimer's Association. And I really want to thank Sudha for everything she's done. Partnering with UT Health has been a real strong mission of mine, and this just makes me really excited that not only today, but going forward, we're going to do a lot of programs, activities together so we can reach more people living with Alzheimer's disease. In Texas, I oversee a team of 125 dedicated individuals that are throughout the state that are supporting the 380,000 people living with Alzheimer's in Texas and the 1.6 million unpaid caregivers that are taking care of them. It's a huge project. And I have to tell you, I learned about Alzheimer's disease in 1989 when my grandmother was diagnosed. I had never even heard of Alzheimer's disease, and suddenly I was living it every day. And to give you a little bit of a perspective, Ronald Reagan wasn't diagnosed till 1994, so there wasn't a lot written in everyday magazines. I think I found one article in Time magazine, and it warned me to stop using deodorant. So you can imagine in South Texas what summer was like that. So those are the types of misinformation that the Alzheimer's Association is out there to educate people and make sure they know are not correct. We want to give the correct care and support information to families and professionals. And we're also out there to make sure you know what research is happening globally, because there's a lot happening, and we all need to be supporting that research. So that person at the Alzheimer's Association, I have to say one of my heroes, is Dr. Maria Carillo. She oversees our scientific efforts globally. I know our CEO, Harry Johns, has said many times she knows more Alzheimer's researchers than anybody else on the planet. And I know that's true because I've never seen anybody travel more than Maria. But please welcome her all the way from Chicago. We brought her the best weather possible, but Dr. Maria Carillo to San Antonio.
It's great to be here. Wow, it sure beats Chicago weather. So Dr. Seshadri and Dr. Maestre, thank you so much. I want to thank President Henrich and everyone for putting this together. What an amazing opportunity for us to talk about Alzheimer's in this setting. And thanks to all of you for being here. I know that we're all in this room committed to the same thing, and I, for one, on behalf of the Alzheimer's Association, a national and global organization, is thanking you every day for everything you do, not only to get the word out about this dreaded disease, but also for everything you do to help us move that needle towards a more effective treatment. Thank you for that. The Alzheimer's Association is the world's largest funder and nonprofit funder of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias research in the world. We have about $165 million active or committed today in 25 different countries because the cure can come from anywhere, and we want to be able to fund it wherever it comes from. But that includes millions of dollars invested in Texas because so many fabulous institutions and researchers are here, and I'm so proud to have Dr. Sudha Seshadri join us with Dr. Gladys Maestre and others on the team here in San Antonio, and Dallas, and Texas, and Rio Grande Valley, with all of amazing research that's going on. And conversations like this, being invited over the next few days, including starting right here, right now, are the conversations that are necessary to move us to those next steps. Because isolated research that stays in San Antonio doesn't help the rest of the world. Those conversations need to get out, and that's why this is such an amazing opportunity. And I remember it was about a year ago where Dr. Gladys Maestre and I were talking about Sudha's team coming to San Antonio and creating this amazing opportunity and saying, we should have an international conversation in San Antonio. And that dream has come true, and I'm so grateful for that. And that is exactly the type of leadership that President Henrich was just talking about, that is now here and going to actually balloon everything else that's been happening in San Antonio and in Dallas and in Texas broadly, and putting this on the map. So thank you very much. I'm so excited about that. I know that together, the Alzheimer's Association, with all of you, is going to be leading this fight. And I'll tell you that when I see things like this happening around the world, but like here in San Antonio, I know that the question is not if we will succeed, it's when. And all of you are going to help us make that happen faster. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Rita, would you like to say a few words?
I'd like to welcome Dr. Seshadri for inviting me and being here with this distinguished panel and part of this amazing symposium. I'm chair of the Texas Council on Alzheimer's and Related Disorders, and I'm here on behalf of our council. And I'm honored to say that Dr. Seshadri is a member of our council. Many of you may not know that Texas had great foresight in 1988 when people couldn't even say the name Alzheimer's. They established a council on Alzheimer's. And in 1998, they mandated that they establish a consortium of medical institutions throughout Texas. And then in 2005, they funded that council. So it is our council's responsibility to ensure that the funds are distributed to the medical centers. There are now 9 medical institutions throughout Texas called the Texas Alzheimer's Research and Care Consortium, which you'll hear more about tomorrow. And so we're so honored to have Dr. Seshadri here on our council, adding all her energy and expertise to this disease, Alzheimer's. Thank you.
Thank you. As we start the panel, I just have two important announcements to make. Over the next 2 days, we'll be meeting at the Wyndham Garden scientists, students from all types of area of medicine and science, trying to answer a couple of important questions. What is the type of dementia we're seeing in South Texas? Can we find answers about dementia risk in Hispanics that will translate all over the nation, all over the world? And are there precise, personalized approaches that are going to help people? Because we believe that's the way we can help people. That kind of personalized, precise, empathic care is personified in one of the faculty members that it has been an honor to have at the Biggs Institute as the inaugural Glenn and Ann Biggs Chair, Professor of Neurology, Dr. Diane Solomon. May I have her stand, please? Other wonderful caring neurologists. Everybody that you see wearing an orange tag is faculty or staff at the Biggs. And after the panel, we encourage everybody, our community of San Antonians, please introduce yourselves to us. Some of us are new here. We need your help. We need your support. Together, we can do this. I will ask Dr. Carillo and Dr. Maestre to stay on and invite others on our panel to step up. Dr. Ken Kosik from the University of California, Santa Barbara, who will be speaking on making the lifestyle changes needed to reduce the risk for dementia. Dr. Nicholas Scarmeas, who is from both the Columbia University at the National Kapodistrian University of Athens. Dr. Alan Peterson, who is from our own UT Health San Antonio after a distinguished 21-year career in the forces. Air Force. Dr. Mary Ganguly, professor of psychiatry at Pittsburgh. Dr. Lisa Shulman, professor of neurology at the University of Maryland at Baltimore. Our own San Antonian, Dr. Bob Gracie, who has led Alzheimer's research and been the president and CEO of the Texas Biomedical Research Institute. And of course, last but not the least, our panel leader, David Martin Davies of Texas Public Radio. I will briefly invite the speakers. We will have 3 brief presentations on very important topics, followed by answers to your questions. So the first speaker is Dr. Ken Kosik. Dr. Kosik is currently co-director of the Neuroscience Research Institute at the University of California at Santa Barbara. He has been a professor at the Harvard Medical School, neurologist at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, spent over 2 decades researching familial Alzheimer's and finding some of the key genes in Colombia, but is also really a Renaissance man who has covered so many aspects of how to protect ourselves from Alzheimer's disease, and co-authored a book, The Alzheimer's Solution, How Today's Care is Failing Millions and How We Can Do Better. He has had numerous awards and been in the media many times. So Dr. Kosik will be speaking on protecting your brain from Alzheimer's disease. A panel discussion on the role, making the lifestyle changes needed to reduce risk for dementia.
Thank you very much to the Biggs family. Thank you, Seshadri, and thank you all for coming out today. I'm going to talk about this latter topic, lifestyle changes that we can adopt to reduce the risk for dementia. And I think we really have 2 choices right now. We can wait for an FDA-approved drug, or we can implement a risk reduction measures right now. Just like Maria Carillo said, I too am extremely optimistic that there will be a drug, but it's not going to be tomorrow. And I think that it's important for us to pay some attention to the fact that there is a lot of good data that will reduce our risk. There's no promises that it will actually ultimately ever prevent the disease, but if you can reduce your risk right now, I think there's every reason to do it. So so here's just a very quick look of what's involved in risk reduction. It's really not rocket science. It's something that anyone can do. You really just, the role of a physician is actually sort of minimal. There are a few medical risks that are very, very clear. You should know your numbers. You should know your blood pressure. You should know your lipid levels. You should know your glucose, your fasting glucose level. And fortunately, if any of these numbers are off, there are drugs to help you get them corrected. So there is no reason not to for everyone in this room to know that your absolute numbers and to do something about it. And every one of those is a risk for Alzheimer's disease. The second category are lifestyle risks. And once again, these are things that we can all do something about. And there's a list of them right there. Diet, exercise, stress, social isolation can be a problem. Cognitive challenges, we should adopt cognitive challenges in our lives, and good night's sleep. All of these are important, but the one of them for which there is the most evidence, which is head and shoulders above every single other one on the list. They're all important, but the number one thing that we can all do is exercise. For that one, the evidence is really incontrovertible. The others, there is good evidence, and I think we want to adopt everything on that list. But I really would strongly suggest that we all adopt a good exercise program. There was recently a paper published by a scientist named Jakob Stern in Colombia who showed that even adopting an exercise program, if you've been a couch potato your whole life and you're now 60 years old, that even then you can actually increase the cortical thickening by a little bit and improve your executive function. Exercise is good for all of us. Now, here's just a little run-through of all those items to share them with you. There's lots of things that we can do to make it more palatable. People don't necessarily like to go to the gym all the time, but there are these classes, Zumba classes. There's ways that we can actually get ourselves to adhere to a lifestyle program, a beneficial lifestyle program that is perhaps a little bit more palatable than sort of making our lives, making it really onerous. I recently added one picture down the corner because we're learning more and more about sleep and the importance that sleep has in our lives. When I Googled sleep and Alzheimer's on the web, I got that picture down in the corner there. That's a mattress called memory foam. I thought that was a perfect name for a kind of sleep remedy. So all of these things are important. There's, you see a frog there. Believe it or not, that social isolation is not good for us, and it's a problem among elders, especially when their friends may be passing away. We do want to, human beings are social creatures, and sort of staying in the mix, participating in whether it's a bowling league or your church group or your university, whatever it is really important for our cognitive health. And my number one is dancing. I think dancing actually gets social behavior, it gets exercise, it gets memory, it gets all of that. And here in Texas, if you're into dancing, it's probably line dancing. So that's a good one. Now here's the healthcare paradox. Prevention is widely acknowledged to be the most effective measure to reduce AD risk. There's no question about it. But there's a lack of interest in this, and there's really a low adherence rate. And not only that, just to implement prevention programs is really hard because prevention programs just, don't really serve as a viable business model. You heard about the reimbursement problem that these programs have from Dr. Henrich. So this is actually something that we have to work on, and I believe what is happening here is going to take us to the next level in being able to implement prevention programs. And part of making them work is to align the medical system with prevention. So this is actually, whoops, I went too far. This is, right now, the medical doctor is the gatekeeper, and that system is not working. I mean, I am a medical doctor, and I would say that when I had a memory clinic at the Brigham, for instance, if our patients were able to find our clinic tucked away in some remote area, they did not have Alzheimer's. Because it was hard to get into the clinic, it was hard to find the clinic, and it was just, we need to figure out a way to make Alzheimer programs more accessible. And another problem that this system has when it's in the hands of just MDs. MDs play a very important role. I don't want to minimize it. But there's an increasing appreciation that genetic testing is playing an important role here. Not just for the individuals that have very serious autosomal dominant mutations that we'll talk about over the next few days, these rare mutations that cause a very serious form of Alzheimer's disease, but for all of us, because we are learning more and more about the genetic risk factors, and those are things that we should know about. And physicians actually, right now, are not well trained in genetics. So I'm going to conclude by showing you a model which I have believe can be adopted from the eye people. When you think about vision, you don't necessarily think about a tertiary care hospital. You think about in every neighborhood, there's an eye shop, and you get attracted to the eye shop because the first thing you see in the window are the glasses, and you think about fashion. You know, I love those rims, I love, you know, the red armatures on the side. There's all kinds of things that look really cool about different glasses, and we like to look at them. And you come into the shop, and the next thing you get into the shop, it's very non-threatening, is an optometrist who measures your visual acuity. That's the kind of thing you need to know. It's just basic information. And it's only a few people who end up into the very core of the eye shop and see the ophthalmologist who may have an optic nerve tumor or glaucoma or something serious. In my Alzheimer's clinics, I have spent a lot of time, maybe half the people that come in, I actually end up reassuring them that they don't have Alzheimer's. And that is important because people really worry about that a lot. It's an important role, and having that set up in a tertiary care center may not be the best utilization of our resources. So why not start brain shops that are more easily accessible? We're on the outside in the window. We have things like all the games that you can play to increase your mental acuity, and you come in and the next layer in, we get the neuropsychologist who measures our mental function, and then it's only a smaller subset of people that will reach the very interior of the shop and see the neurologist because they may actually have a problem that's more serious, like Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, for those very interesting and provocative ideas. We'll have time for questions later. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. The other big thing that we all wonder about is, what about our diet? Can we do something a little differently to reduce our risk? And Dr. Nicholas Scarmeas, who is from both the University of Athens and Columbia, and has done the leading work on what is the most studied diet for prevention of dementia and death, the Mediterranean diet and cognition. He will talk about the science, the epidemiology, the mechanisms, and why we should consider it.
So thank you, thank you, Sudha, for the invitation. It's my first time in Texas. It's really impressive. The weather is greater than Greece, I can say. It's really so. One second. I don't know why it doesn't show. This is from a paper we recently published where we tried to summarize the evidence. I don't know, maybe you can check with the slides because there's a table there. But we tried to summarize the evidence, and what we had in this paper was that there were a lot of studies looking into different nutrients, different foods, and some were positive, some were neutral. And one can pick and choose. So if one wants to support some evidence that a certain food that we eat is beneficial for cognition and Alzheimer's disease, one can do it. But then in reality, if we look at the literature, there are a lot of conflicting studies. So part of the reason that there are these conflicting studies is that most studies so far have looked into isolated foods or nutrients. But in reality, we do not eat vitamin C for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? So we eat foods, and each food contains many nutrients and hundreds of chemicals. So there's a lot of interactions there, and one of the ways to overcome this is to look at a more real-life approach and look at what we call dietary patterns. So such a dietary pattern is the Mediterranean diet, and I will take you a little bit back into history. Some problems here with the slides. So this slide was supposed to show you Europe, actually. and these five circles are 5 countries. So there was the so-called 7-country study. It was started by an American. His name was Ansel Keys. He was a physiologist in Minnesota. And he put together cohorts from 7 countries. Oh, great. So these 5 countries that you see in Europe, and then the US and Japan. And they followed these people in the 60s, and can we go to the next slide? Because I think... Great. So, and in Greece, they were following people from these two islands, and to make, can we go to the next? To make a long story short, what they found 5 years later was that the mortality in these Greek islands, it was rural population, it was much lower than it was supposed to be. So they had around 20 deaths and they were expecting 70. They tried to look and compare and try to attribute this to various factors, and finally they thought that the diet that they were following was what was making the difference, and then the concept of a Mediterranean type diet started. Can we go to the next slide? So since then there have been a lot of studies about the beneficial effects of this dietary pattern in many medical conditions and diseases, not only cardiovascular as from the original study, but also certain cancers, overall mortality and so forth. Can we go to the next? Great. So what is this diet? It sort of summarizes, as you can see at the base of the pyramid here, it's mostly a plant-based diet. So a lot of legumes, a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruits, not a lot of meat. You can see meat in the top of the pyramid, so not a lot of saturated fatty acids. Most of the fat in this diet comes from olive oil, which is at the base of the pyramid among the fruits, which is monounsaturated fats. And there's more fish than meat, and there's some alcohol, usually in moderation and usually during meals. But what about this diet and brain function and cognition? So we had this first study a few years ago, but not in this Greek island that I show you, but in Manhattan, because this is where we had the data. And what we found, we had a population of about 2,000 people. We followed them for 4 to 5 years, and what we found was that those people whose diet were closer to the Mediterranean diet principles, they were not eating a Mediterranean diet, but they were closer to these principles, they had less chances of developing Alzheimer's disease in the future. And then we looked at other related structures like what we call mild cognitive impairment, this gray zone between being normal and having dementia, and we had a similar association. So if you were normal and you were eating in a healthier way, you were less likely to develop mild cognitive impairment, and if you were at the mild cognitive impairment stage and you were following a healthy diet, it was less likely to go into the dementia stage. But then we tried to explore why do we see this? There are many reasons why diet could affect our brain function. You can see here in the column in the middle that there are many different mechanisms. Some of these mechanisms that you see here, the amyloid, the neurodegeneration, are the mechanisms that are more tightly related to Alzheimer's disease. But also there are vascular changes in the brain, there's inflammation in the brain, there's oxidative stress in the brain, and there are a lot of studies connecting what we eat with our brain function. So there are a lot of different ways that this relation could take effect. So we try to look into this a little bit. So what about the health of the blood vessels in our brain? So what you can see here, these white spots that look like cotton, they are so-called white matter hyperintensities in the brain. To a certain extent, they are related to the health of the blood vessels in the brain. So we were noticing in this study that the healthier diet you were following, the less of these white matter hyperintensities you had in your brain. And not only these white matter hyperintensities, but even blocked vessels in the brain. So infarcts, having a stroke, and sometimes these strokes are small or even larger. And what we found in another study, you can see in black that the more you were adhering to these principles of healthy diet, the less likely it was to have strokes, to have infarcts in your brain. And we looked at other elements relating to Alzheimer's disease. This is in a more recent study that looks into atrophy, the shrinking of our brain. And what you can see on the upper left in light blue is that people who were following this diet, they were less likely to have shrunk brains, so the volume of their brain was higher. And even the amyloid, the more central element of Alzheimer's disease. We collaborated with colleagues from Australia, the ABLE study, and they had close to 80 subjects with repeated brain MRI, with repeated brain scans, where they were measuring the amyloid in the brain. And this was over 3 years. And what we saw there was that the higher the adherence to this diet, the lower the rate of amyloid accumulation over these years. So there are a lot of different mechanisms and there are other studies, but I just wanted to give you a flavor that there are many different ways that would connect these two. There are a couple of issues. I will try just to touch on them and we can discuss a little bit more. One is replication. We are seeing these associations, but not only us. We try to do this meta-analysis, and it seems that most studies that have looked into the association of a healthy dietary pattern with cognition and dementia, they seem to be having similar findings. And you can see from this review that I couldn't show in the first slide on the top that there are many studies. The green circles suggest studies are studies that suggest a protective association. Of course, there are some yellows, but the majority seem to be protection. The second issue is healthy lifestyle overall. We heard a little bit before. Usually people who eat better are more healthy in their lifestyle in general. So for example, they exercise more. And we heard about the significance of exercise a little bit before. So could it be that those people who eat more a Mediterranean type diet, they are doing more exercise? But we were able to look into that, and it seems that the association is independent. The associations are independent. So getting people who exercise to the same degree, if you eat better, you have a benefit, and vice versa. Getting people who eat the same way, if you exercise, you seem to be having a benefit. And actually, when we looked at people who were both eating in a healthy way and exercising a lot, compared to people who were like couch potatoes and they were doing none of these healthy behaviors, the difference in risk was between 60 and 70%. The last thing is clinical trials, observation versus randomization, and I will stop. As you can see here, most of the data that we have on this diet are observational. We ask people what they do and we follow them over time and we observe whether people who have a healthier behavior are more protected, but we haven't done the rigorous experimental manipulation of assigning people to a certain diet and comparing them to a controlled diet. There are some studies, some small studies as you can see there, but it is something to come in the future. So this is still a question, but we know that healthy diet is beneficial for cardiovascular diseases, for a lot of other medical conditions and diseases, and we have evidence that it may be good for our memory and Alzheimer's disease. And I will stop here. Thank you.
I'm sure you have many questions. We'll save them for the panel discussion. Our next speaker is Dr. Alan Peterson, who is a clinical psychologist, and after 21 years in the US Air Force, he active duty including deployments in Operations Noble Eagle, Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. He decided to dedicate his professional career to understanding and elevating PTSD and building resilience, and started a Strong Star consortium of over 150 research collaborators, 40 institutions worldwide, focused right here in San Antonio, exploring the connections between stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, brain trauma, and the risk of dementia. Very appropriate topic for Military City.
Thank you. The first thing I thought when I was asked to speak at the conference was, I am not an Alzheimer's researcher. I'm not a neurodegenerative disorder researcher. So I wondered why I was invited. And as I've explored this, I now think I have an idea why that might be. So I want to focus on stress, post-traumatic stress disorder, and dementia. If you look at the research, there's recent research that does show that veterans with PTSD are twice as likely as other veterans to develop dementia. So that is something we certainly need to be exploring. I think many of you have heard of this thing called post-traumatic stress disorder. Basically, the cause is exposure to some type of significant extreme event, and for the populations I'm working with, it ends up being things that happen during a military deployment, during combat, but there's many other natural disasters, automobile accidents, assaults, that type of thing that can cause PTSD. The symptoms, I think most of you are familiar with the symptoms. There's re-experiencing symptoms, there's avoidance, there's a significant physiologic arousal that occurs. If you think about those types of symptoms, you might start to wonder long-term whether those might have an impact on your brain. How common is this? About 7% of Americans will meet the diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. It's more common in females than males, and that's primarily because females are significantly more likely to be a victim of assault. But if you look at the military population and the veteran population, it's about twice that. It's about 14% or so. Who's at the greatest risk? Those that are in certain professions, certainly the military, law enforcement, first responders are at risk. Individuals that are in a risky situation where they may be assaulted are at risk as well. We've learned over time that the primary risk factor for post-traumatic stress disorder is really related to the event itself. The event is incredibly important. And so studying the after effects, we need to understand what happens during the event, obviously, but what happens over time. There's lots of comorbidities with post-traumatic stress disorder. We don't think about memory problems per se. We think about depression is common, sleep disorders, chronic pain, substance use disorders, suicide. The one at the bottom, though, is one, certainly with military personnel and veterans, that we think about the most. That's the traumatic brain injury. Primarily for military personnel, especially those that have deployed since 9/11, it's related to some type of an explosion, an improvised explosive device, a mortar, a rocket, some type of explosion. And that results oftentimes in what's called traumatic brain injury, or TBI. So there's a traumatic event, an explosion, an event in which there's a disruption of brain function. Usually there's some type of external force, although with blast exposure, there's a barrel pressure that occurs along with that makes it even more complicated to understand what happens with some blast injuries. And then there's a number of symptoms that go along with that traumatic brain injury. The VA and DoD definition of TBI, there's a number of symptoms that go along with that. A loss of consciousness, so someone's had a head injury, they've either lost consciousness, memory problems, okay, that may be the link later on to Alzheimer's or neurodegenerative disorders, alteration in mental state for a time right after the injury, and there's the neurological deficits, and sometimes there's an actual lesion that occurs, although most traumatic brain injuries are what we call a mild traumatic brain injury. I think you've seen a lot with athletes and NCAA and the NFL, for example, where there's other types of smaller injuries that happen over time that also can lead to significant brain problems. So a big challenge with military personnel and veterans is oftentimes it's the same event in which there's significant trauma. A best example would be an improvised explosion, improvised explosive device. So a big explosion, lots of individuals are injured, many people may be killed. Those that are the first responders get exposure to tremendous carnage. They see things that no human should have to see. They see things that are really difficult to forget about. And at the same time, if they're nearby, they may have also been exposed to the blast piece itself and have a concussion. So the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and TBI, they overlap a lot. And there's a lot of research that we're doing with the Strong Star Consortium to try to sort through the differences between post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. So the link, stress, PTSD, dementia. So certainly there's the physiologic consequences of stress. So when a person has post-traumatic stress disorder, it's almost like there's a regular alarm reaction, that fight or flight, that stress reaction. That happens many, many times a day, but I would describe that as a false alarm. There's no real danger. The person is thinking of something or they're exposed to something, and yet their body goes through this significant stress response. Adrenaline is flowing, heart rate is up, blood pressure is up, lots of things are happening, and that happens repeatedly many, many times a day. So certainly the association between the exposure to these stressful events or these reactions and later cognitive dysfunctions, that's been one of the linkages that's been hypothesized between stress and PTSD and dementia. The neurohormonal pathways are also a piece, and genetic factors are ones that are thought to be very important. So certainly there's more research that's needed in this area to really look at this causal link. And the problem is there's a lot of logistical research problems to try to make these linkages between veterans and service members, and maybe down the road neurodegenerative disorders that may occur. So really what's needed there, we need to have a well-controlled, carefully executed longitudinal study. So we need something long-term that can follow individuals to try to determine what some of these linkages might be. The Strong Start Consortium, which was established here in 2008, is the nation's largest research consortium focused on diagnosing, understanding, treating post-traumatic stress disorder in active duty service members and veterans. Not going to go into details about our consortium. We do have a website you can go to. We have lots of clinical trials that we have completed and that are ongoing. Some basic science studies, some genetic epidemiological studies. One of those studies is a study that we did at Fort Hood several years ago, screened about 4,000 soldiers before they deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, did genetic analyses, so we took 3 vials of blood, DNA, RNA, plasma. They all deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. They've now come back. We've done some assessments on all 4,000 of them, and about 2,000 of them, we actually had them come back in, and we've got blood-based biomarkers on them again. So, what is needed related to that? We need to have somebody that I could work with that has expertise in something maybe like a Framingham study, something like that, that might be able to take these 4,000 individuals and follow them over time. Again, we've got genetic biomarker assessments of these individuals, many of which are young, and there's the opportunity to follow these individuals over the long term. So Dr. Henrich, with his what's called the Brain Health Initiative at the university, is seeking funding to try to bring our different groups of investigators together, to allow me to work with the Biggs Institute and also with the Barshop Institute to work together to try to focus on improving the health of brains over the long term. I had the benefit during my military career to be stationed in England for several years, and my wife and I still go back on a regular basis. We have to be back on the 65th anniversary of D-Day, and our local newspaper, this was the headline of the local newspaper. Basically, this was a survivor in his 80s, a survivor of Normandy, and basically what he said was there has not been a single day since that date that he didn't see the images of the bodies floating in the water. This is what we're trying to prevent. If we can treat PTSD, treat it effectively, that might be one strategy to help prevent Alzheimer's, certainly in veterans and service members, but those connections in individuals that do develop it later, that's the science that's needed to really advance the treatment and hopefully the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. Thanks.
Thank you for those wonderful thought-provoking talks. Absolutely, we will collaborate. Absolutely, we have a healthy brain clinic and dietary advice, all at the Biggs. And now, the most exciting part, I'm going to invite David Martin Davies. We thank you so much. You had us earlier on the source to discuss Alzheimer's, a very important topic, and he's going to lead the panel discussion.
Thank you very much. And as we all know that as we talk about Alzheimer's tonight, time is not on our side because the Oscars are tonight. And we hope to get you out of here before the Oscars end. So with that, we will try to, there's a lot of great panelists here, experts, as you know, world class. We'll try and cover so much ground here. And one of the big questions I have, we received questions as we walked in here, people wrote down questions, we also received questions online. And if you have an answer you really want to give this talk, that's the best way to do that, or raise your hand. But the question that I want to start off with is how can we differentiate between just normal aging and having dementia and whether or not you have signs of Alzheimer's. What are ways to sign it? And Dr. Nicholas?
So, on a practical everyday level, in normal aging, we lose some cognitive skills, but we lose just a little bit. In dementia, it's a more profound loss of skills in terms of memory, orientation. So you can think of it like, let's say, in terms of mobility. As we grow older, we run slower or we can only walk, but it's not really an orthopedic disease. But if we get a knee problem, a degenerative knee problem, then that's a disease. So in terms of everyday skills, it's a matter of degree, and of course it's related to different changes in the brain. In normal aging, we don't see the changes in the brain that we have in Alzheimer's disease.
But is aging and dementia, are they yoked? Are you going to have one with the other?
So, this is Maria Carillo with the Alzheimer's Association, and what Dr. Scarmeas has said is true. There is a very big difference, and I think that speaks to your question. This is not normal aging, right? And there is a disease that we know, and Dr. Alzheimer actually saw under the microscope, but now we know so much more that there are also other related dementias and so many other things changing as we age that contribute to what would be non-normal, non-healthy aging to healthier aging. We see super agers, we see people that are in their 90s and very active. You also see that there are people in their 60s who, maybe your loved ones, like I've experienced in my family, who have dementia, and it's a very big difference, right? So this is not normal aging, and at alz.org there's a lot of things that you can look at to show the 10 signs of Alzheimer's or related dementia, so you can see what's normal, but might be worried well, and forgot my keys because I didn't sleep so well, or I'm stressed and I'm running around, versus something that's actually really concerning that maybe you should take to your physician.
I would just add to that, there are many different kinds of dementia, and we are now beginning to be able to distinguish between those kinds, and the follow-up or the procedures we would follow are different from those, for example, Parkinson's. And there are cases of mixed causes. There's mixed dementias where a person may have 2 or more of these underlying problems.
And I know you wanted to answer that.
So the way I usually explain this is, after the age of 30, we're not getting any smarter. You know how little kids learn so much new stuff every day and they can remember it, and they just keep doing that till they're about 30, and then it kind of levels off and slows down. So everybody is going downhill a little bit with aging. And what we lose most of all is speed, so we can do pretty much everything we used to as long as they give us enough time, but sometimes they don't give us enough time. But after the age of 60 or 65, maybe 5% of people, 1 in 20 people, have something more than just normal aging. And the older we get, the bigger that percentage. So by age 90, it's maybe 30, 50%. But that's still 50 to 70% of people over 90 who don't have anything really serious in terms of dementia. But dementia is when we lose enough mental functioning that we can't function independently. That's kind of the cutoff between microcognitive impairment and dementia, is when we lose our independence in everyday functioning because of loss of memory and other mental functions. And it's just something for the young people in the room to remember if you're past 30.
All right, so Elisa, you wanted to answer.
Thank you. It's a really important question because actually both Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease generally are diagnosed quite late because people do get confused about, I'm slowing down either cognitively or motorically. They are blaming it on aging. And so it's not uncommon to be diagnosing people in my area of Parkinson's disease many years after the problem began. And I think in Alzheimer's there's also quite a bit of a delay at times. So it's not trivial.
And Ms. Smith?
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Gladys Maestre from University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. I think that when memory changes and cognitive changes begin, they are very personal. Only you know. You know something has changed. But we kind of justify, and most of the time, has to do with sleep, with stress, with age. And then becomes not only personal, but somebody notices. This has impact in your daily activities, a little bit, wasting money, losing valuable things, and then perhaps the spouse notices, and then or the kids or the secretary, somebody else notices. And then what I usually see is that when the disease progresses, particularly fast, then the person that has the memory problem is not worried anymore. And the spouse, for example, is getting worried, and wow, this is getting, and then, oh, I'm fine. And then when they go to the doctor, the patient is kind of relaxed and relaxed, So it begins as a very personal experience, and that's why we need to be aware where we are in life and how are we managing our life. It has to do with our culture, with the way our values, but also has to do with being aware and also being in touch with significant others that are genuinely concerned about our quality of life. And sometimes with age, we can get stubborn about it. I want to be independent, I want to get, inspired, negative feelings. So it requires a lot. But I agree that we don't get faster with age, but I don't believe we get smarter and wiser.
So Dr. Sudha and then Dr. King.
I just wanted to, it is very hard to recognize that one might be losing this essential part of oneself. JAMA has a very moving essay by two physicians who shared a practice, and the wife began suspecting that her husband had early onset dementia. And the challenge of facing that, confronting him with that, having him accept. So all I can say is to all of you who are going through such difficult worries, please, you have a partner, we have counselors, we have neuropsychologists. If you're worried, reach out, reach for help to your primary care physician or to BIDS. Thank you.
So Dr. King, Kosik, I want to hear your answer, but I also want to supplement the question asking, could we have some sort of benchmarks that people could take when they feel like they're at their normal state, either through like a video game or some sort? I know that there are high schools with the resources that do that with their high school football and soccer players in order to test for concussions later on. If we can establish your normal state, then we can detect when you may have some sort of degradation.
Right, so thank you for that. Adding to the question, it was pretty much what I wanted to say, which is that at some point, all of us will probably worry about having Alzheimer's disease. Gladys made a very nice point about this personal feeling before even anyone notices. And therefore, there is something that I would suggest that we do, which is simply get neuropsychological testing. Because Alzheimer's is a progressive disease. So if you are worried about it, and then you get the testing, and you haven't changed in 6 months, you're okay. That would be, I think, the most simple way to handle this problem.
The other issue, we know there's genetic testing, and people can choose whether or not they want to hear, whether or not they have those markers that put them at a high risk. And then they say, I don't want to know, because there's nothing that can be done once I know. I don't want to, it doesn't. So is that not the open mindset that we want to encourage in our society? Should people know? Yes.
I can start, and I think there are going to be a lot of great answers on this panel, and I'm honored to be a part of it. I can share with you that, first of all, on a personal side, my husband is at risk, as I am, as we age, but my husband in particular, his mother is the third of 4 siblings to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia and to have passed away of it. and his father passed away just a few months ago as well of the same thing. So we know that we think about this a lot in his family. We think, I have 4 children, and my 4 children ask me, well, what's this mean for Dad? What's this mean for us? Did we inherit something? So we think about this genetic testing issue, and we all know that there's opportunities to get that for $99 for Christmas or for your Father's Day gift, you know, there's all kinds of people selling you things on TV. But the only thing that I would say is that what we have followed is advice that the Alzheimer's Association has given, and it's on our website, because we just want to make sure people are making educated decisions about this very personal thing, and be aware that in the future, certainly health insurance, but today life insurance and long-term care insurance are not protected from asking you questions about your genetic risk factors. So just be careful when you make those decisions. You know what you're deciding to do and to know about. And then I think it's important for us all to think about what it means to our loved ones. So what we call consanguinity, right? You're related to people that this may also impact, this news may impact. So you have to decide how you're going to share this. And talking to a genetic counselor would be a very good idea. So we have a website for that as well, because it might impact your children, it impacts your siblings. Everything you find out impacts those that are related to you. So those are the things that I would caution, and that's what we think about when we make our decision about getting a genetic risk test for our family.
And just wanted to add to that.
I think that how people answer that question will change once we have a truly effective, targeted, disease-modifying treatment. We don't at the moment. And so having this knowledge is just something that you carry with you, and we know that everybody, whether they have a genetic marker or not, should be exercising and eating right and dancing and sleeping and doing all those things you recommended without knowing what your genetic markers are. But there's one small subgroup of people who have the autosomal dominant genes, where if you have that gene, you're going to get the disease, and lots of people in your family had it, and they probably know even without getting the testing because the family history is so strong. But there are drug trials being done in people like that.
Dr. Nicholas, you talked about the importance of exercise. Also, Dr. Ken, you did too. Maybe get both your answers on this. So do we know, I mean, not all of us are, when you exercise, I'm going to go run a marathon tomorrow. That's not really the solution. It's like, what kind of exercise? Are we talking about high-intensity exercise where I really get my heart rate up? Or can I just try and just get a light sweat going? What works? What is enough exercise? Okay. Yes.
The recommendations are 150 minutes to 300 minutes per week of aerobic exercise of moderate intensity. If you do vigorous exercise, you can drop that down to just 150 minutes rather than go for the 300. That's the recommendation that's been coming from all the various health services nationally for a number of years. You can take it one step further, that in addition to aerobic exercise, it's probably a good idea to do some weight training, because if you can build a little bit of muscle mass and some bone strength, you also not only protect yourself from Alzheimer's, but muscles use up glucose, and you protect yourself from diabetes as well.
Dr. Nicholas, and more on that. And also, is it the blood pumping and helping the capillaries get more oxygen to these extreme parts, or is there some sort of hormones being released? What's going on there?
Yeah, the mechanism, I mean, there are many links between exercise and thinking, memory, cognition, Alzheimer's disease. There are studies that suggest that certain factors in our brain that have neuroprotective effects are upregulated when you have exercises. There are genes that are again have such neuroprotective effects that are upregulated also, are expressed at higher levels. So there are many different mechanisms that links with metabolic status in the brain, with oxidation, with inflammation. So, I think the current evidence has been summarized pretty well.
Okay. So, I mean, could I get the same effect from riding a roller coaster? That's going to get my heart pumping. But Lisa, sure.
Okay. In the exercise trials that we've done at the University of Maryland, we've learned some interesting things. We didn't try roller coasters, but we did compare what we call lower intensity treadmill exercise to higher intensity. And interestingly, we found that our patients tend to be so sedentary, talking about couch potatoes, in their lifestyle, that the lower intensity exercise, which was just walking longer distances at comfortable paces, was in fact very aerobic for our patients. So that was really interesting. And another thing we learned that was also quite surprising, I guess, is that you can spend months working out on the treadmill, but you don't actually improve your muscle strength. You're improving your fitness and your endurance and your gait speed, but not your muscle strength. So we found, as others have found, that you need to do resistance exercise and muscle strengthening exercise to increase and improve strength. And these things aren't trivial. They're important for reducing risk of falls and maintaining ambulation.
Yes.
So, you know, I think this is something that, being at the Alzheimer's Association, we get this question so often, like, what is the recipe that I should be following? You know, roller coaster ride's not a bad idea if you can do it for 50 minutes and have your heart rate up for 50 minutes, but it's not. It lasts a minute and a half, so that's not going to work. So what is that recipe? You know, I think Dr. Scarmeas said it at the end of his talk. We need these rigorous trials that tell us what those recipes are, even though we all kind of know what healthy eating and lifestyle is and what it looks like, and we've certainly seen recent reports that blood pressure control actually can slow your cognitive decline as you age. So what we are doing in the United States is trying to do that randomized control study, because in Finland it actually worked, and people over 60 had a 30% reduction in their cognitive decline when they're healthy aging if they did 4 things. They had a certain nutritional regimen, which was the Nordic diet. For them, it's in Finland. They had cardiovascular control, really strong cardiovascular control, so blood pressure, cholesterol, etc. They had physical activity, so they had escalating physical activity that involved both aerobic and strengthening. And they had cognitive stimulation, so they did some very cognitive challenging things on a computer. So
I would add, stay off those downtown scooters.
And stay off those downtown scooters. Unless you're wearing a helmet, maybe if you're wearing a helmet, you might be okay, because TBI is important too. But you know, we're not, you know, in the United States, we're not Finns, right? So we wanted to take a page out of that book, and we're going to study 2,000 people with that recipe. We're just going to moderate a little bit. We're going to use the Mediterranean and DASH diet, so thank you, Dr. Scarmeas. And we're going to do a specific plan and compare 2 groups so that we can give people that recipe for that healthy aging. So give us a few years. We've just launched the study in 2 sites. It's a $35 million study that we're launching, and so give us some time and we'll be able to give you that recipe.
And Dr. Alan Peterson, you're looking at PTSD and the effects of stress, and we know that many of the people who have sleep disorders, where do you see the connectivity? Where is it the comorbidity of maybe many have also had head injuries? Where does it all connect?
Just to get back to the one question about riding a roller coaster or whatnot, so from a stress or a post-traumatic stress disorder perspective, that does not lead to physical fitness. In fact, it leads to wear and tear on the body. So I know you said it tongue-in-cheek, but actually, you know, that type of stress, that type of physical reactivity does not lead to increased fitness. In fact, it wears the system down. So there's a negative impact of that point. So it's very complicated. I don't think we know all of the connections. The analogy I give is a simple one. An automobile. If you think about an automobile like your body, if you're stopped at a stoplight and you're revving your gas, you know, up and down, you take off and spin your wheels whenever you take off, and you slam your wheels when you come to a red light. You know, all of that, you know, is wear and tear in the automobile, just like it's wear and tear on your body. Again, exercise is, you know, it's good for weight, it's good for stress. It seems to be good for post-traumatic stress disorder, and obviously it's good for your brain. So, as a clinical health psychologist, which is my training, You just need to find something that works for you. Everybody doesn't like running or marathons or ultra marathons, but that's okay. Walking, biking, swimming, you need to find what works for you, and that's the formula that will work for you.
And so, Dr. Gracie at the Texas Biomedical Research Institute, are we looking towards trying to figure out why do these activities provide these benefits and trying to figure out a pharmaceutical approach?
Yeah, I think getting to the mechanism by which we can protect is key. And so there are a lot of studies going on looking at mechanisms, and we've talked a little bit about some of those already. And that also involves a lot of clinical trials and clinical studies. And I would just like to pitch for something called Trial Match, which is a program that's been in effect, started by the Alzheimer's Association, which is a free, confidential way to get involved in clinical trials, in a number of different kinds of clinical trials. They can be diagnostic, or they can be involving drugs, or they can in pharmacological intervention, or they can be involving exercise, or the kinds of behavioral things that we've just been talking about. And it's called Trial Match, and it's completely confidential. You could just go to the Alzheimer's site, alzheimer's.org/trial match, one word, trial match, and you'll be given a list of kinds of tests that are going on, kinds of clinical trials that are ongoing or being scheduled or being recruited to, which might fit you. And it's completely volunteer, whether you want to get in, if you have and it's not just for individuals with diagnosed Alzheimer's, but of course they need healthy volunteers for many of these clinical trials. So I strongly recommend that you look at that trial match on the Alzheimer's website.
Should we be teasing out beneficial behavior and high-risk behavior? And it's trying to get people to reduce high-risk behavior, which might be, I don't know, if you can tell me, if a lot of drinking, a lot of alcohol consumption, is that a high-risk behavior towards dementia?
And all of those are the kinds of things that we're actually studying. Of course, moderation has always been a key word, and when we're talking about these behavioral kinds of things. But what is exactly the right recipe is, Marie was saying, is one thing that we don't know the perfect recipe. But these are why we have ongoing trials to narrow that, answer that question more accurately.
Dr. Maria Carillo?
I think as we've talked a little bit about, and then hearing and learning more from Dr. Peterson about the, sort of risk behaviors, I actually have a question for Dr. Peterson about it, because I know TBI, we talked about its risk, and we know about its risk through our armed forces, and that is something that has to be addressed, because more and more have been deployed and are going to be aging into that era of dementia and being at higher risk because of what they experienced. And I appreciated what you also said about women having an increased risk. But I wanted to ask you a question specifically about geriatric TBI. Because I think geriatric TBI and risk behaviors, or just falls as we age, sometimes linked to a dementia, can perhaps increase our risk even more so, and can be identified through emergency room visits and other things. I'm wondering if you know a little bit about maybe the prevalence of geriatric TBI, which is, TBI is experience as an older individual, not necessarily associated with, trauma earlier in life, and what that might mean, because it's linked to, I think, what you're asking.
So unfortunately, I think there's not much research on geriatric TBI. Obviously, when it occurs, it's likely to be somewhat devastating. Again, I think the main secret is the prevention piece, right? If you're looking at how do you prevent falls in the geriatric population, a lot of that comes back to the fitness piece again, whether it's walking, again, both the aerobic as well as the strengthening piece. That's the main strategy that keeps people from falling. There's not a lot of good research, but obviously when it does occur with an aged brain where there's an infarct, it ends up usually being fairly devastating.
Yes, sir.
So many of these points about the geriatric TBIs and preventing falling and doing exercise for any of us, we often need a little bit of guidance. I think the point was so well taken that getting on a treadmill is not for everyone, especially not for someone who already has heart disease. If you want to exercise and you have a bad knee or some problem, then you're going to need some help. There's lots of ways in which people can help with those kinds of problems. And that's why another piece of what the kind of person that belongs within an Alzheimer reduced risk setting, like here, are physical therapists and occupational therapists. They have an enormously positive role to help people to implement all the things we're talking about.
So, Dr.
So I wanted to touch two things about physical activity and exercise. One is, remember the power of music. So having the music around will help you, do stuff that it's boring. If you consider that boring, it will be easier. But also, as we saw today, the cardiorespiratory fitness of the beautiful and wonderful chorus people, it's better. And also, dancing, we can touch about it. Because not only you need the coordination, it doesn't matter, how good or bad you dance, but as long as you keep moving, and also remember that in order to dance, you need your brain activated, particularly the premotor areas. So it's a good thing. So that's one thing. Remember the power of music in your life. And probably when you were younger, we use it more, but it's nice to have it. The second point I want to make is that changing lifestyle is not only about will, about intention. That is important, but the community setting is very important. The neighborhood. If you go to Finland, you see the cities are all built up to become elderly and healthy and active, and the Mediterranean diet, you see all this olive oil, and everywhere you see all these vegetables, and you don't see them in South Texas. It's hard. So I think we need to move beyond individual interventions to community-based interventions.
Right, so Dr. Maestre, let's talk about the Latinos and the community and the culture and whether or not it is specifically at a higher risk for dementia and Alzheimer's related conditions.
Yeah, studies in the US show that Latinos have about 50% of higher risk of Alzheimer's. And not only that, but the disease appeared 7 years earlier. And this is not because we go to the doctor more often. But the thing is that because Latinos in average live longer, it has to do a lot with how long we live, and then the burden of the disease in the society and in the families also is higher. Latinos tend to use less all the resources that the nation has created to support caregivers, the Alzheimer's Association and the public health. So I think we need to think about that, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Seshadri for making the Hispanics the focus of this conference. So we can discuss this.
Lucy, should you want to?
Yeah, thanks. This is sort of a kind of an overall comment, really, because we've talked about geriatric TBI. We're talking, of course, about Alzheimer's disease, and then all the kinds of risk factors you mentioned in lifestyle, blood pressure issues, and so forth. And the fact is that these interrelationships between what in medicine we call comorbid problems are incredibly difficult to study. Many of the studies, the very costly study that you mentioned, Maria, I'm sure that you are looking for people who have Alzheimer's disease, and you probably are excluding maybe some other comorbid factors. And so we tend to, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Healthy aging.
Healthy aging. But very often when you actually do studies, you do that. You're looking for a pure disease group and you're excluding other factors. But that isn't the real world. The real world is that We are all getting impacted by so many different factors. And one of the key things we're learning about dementia is that these interrelationships are very potent. So this is really a big area that we need to do better on in the future.
I think you're exactly right, and that's why we're actually looking for people over 60 who are relative couch potatoes, because if you're super exerciser 6 days a week already, you don't have room to improve. So we're looking for folks who have room for improvement, but we're committed to diversity. So 30% will be Latino, African American, and other. We're actually also both in rural and urban communities, because we are not Finland. And we do not all look alike. We don't all go to college. We don't have nationalized health care. We are a very different population in the United States, and we don't eat the Nordic diet. We eat a very different diet. So we're trying to adapt it to different communities. We're starting in 3 places around the country, but we've got room for more, and we're hoping that Texas is a participant as well. But right now we're in North Carolina, we're in San Francisco, and in Chicago. But we need something around here, so we're working with local leadership on that.
I wanted to ask you, one of the interesting things about the Biggs Institute is its attention towards caregivers. And so, Maria, if you could talk a little bit about why that's so important, and so, well, if we come up with a cure, we don't need to worry about that. Well, the cure is not coming for a while. We're still talking about treatment, identification, and support. So the effect on the economy in general as the gray tsunami hits Texas and the nation, and why this is so critical.
Sure, I can certainly start, but I know there are so many on this panel that can speak to this, to this issue. Certainly the costs to this country are going to be upwards of $1 trillion by 2030 if we don't stop this disease. But certainly unpaid caregivers are the ones that bear that most burden, and all of us in the room know this, right? And we ourselves kept our 2 loved ones, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, in a home with 24-hour care. Moved them out of their home, so we had to pay a special rent on that and have them come in and out so that we had 24-hour care for them. And we managed to do that, thank goodness, between all of us chipping in for 8 years. So we were very lucky that we were able to do that. Imagine the people that don't, but that's out-of-pocket expenses that we have. And then I don't think we all recognize the stress. Like my husband, I would see him, how stressed he was when he had to do the overnight shift, lack of sleep, having to go to work the next day on very little sleep because my parents-in-law wake up every 2 hours and you have to be vigilant. They can't fall, they can't try to get out of the house. There's so many things that need to be done. On top of that, the fact that if one of our parents has any kind of infection or anything that takes them to the doctor, hospitals are not prepared to deal with people with dementia, and you had to have somebody with them in that room 24 hours as well. That meant we had double caregiving, one at home with our other parent and one in the hospital with our loved one. So this is something we don't talk about, the stress, the dollars, all of that this country needs to have more conversation about. Now, nationally, the National Alzheimer's Plan, which the Alzheimer's Association passed in 2011, is starting to talk about care and support and long-term care solutions. It's just a conversation that's starting on a national level, but it will get there. But meanwhile, we know that caregivers have to take care of themselves, because if you don't take care of yourself, who's going to take care of your loved one? You need help. Certainly the Alzheimer's Association and partnering with centers of excellence like UT San Antonio are going to be able to offer some of that respite, but don't feel bad about asking for that help. And 2/3 of those caregivers, those 16 million, are women, and we have to take care of our caregivers as well.
Anyone else on the panel want to talk about why this is so critical? This is something that the nation is confronting the nation.
Well, Maria, you might want to comment on the Massachusetts law that were passed this last year.
Sure, so I think certain states are moving very fast in terms of trying to create legislation that helps not only caregivers but also our health systems to identify people with dementia. One of the things that in Massachusetts has just recently passed, the Alzheimer's Association chapter in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, worked with their state legislators to ensure that all emergency and physicians that work with people that are over 60 have training on how to identify a person that is experiencing memory problems and by law are required to talk to them and their family members about it. In addition to that, we have passed legislation globally, right, around the United States that requires the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to reimburse a clinician for a care consultation, so that once you have that diagnosis, you don't just say goodbye, deal with it, you actually have a way to get reimbursed for talking to someone and their family about the future. That's a start, and we need to make sure that physicians everywhere know that, and that that model in Massachusetts can be recreated around the country, because those opportunities can help us to take care of our loved ones better, keep them safer longer, have a better quality of life for the entire family.
Fantastic. Doctor?
I do want to, as somebody who moved from Massachusetts and is proud of that, I do want to say San Antonio is a dementia-friendly city. We have very progressive. The first responders have been trained. There's a special unit that looks out for people with mental problems, and they have been working with our excellent Caring for the Caregiver program. Carol White, where are you? Which to train them. We had a dementia-friendly cities where so many people turned up with very imaginative ideas, and we have this caregiver skills and caring for this thing. So I'm very proud of San Antonio and what they're doing for the caregivers as well. Clearly a lot more needs to be done.
And I know that our local leadership, Meg Barron, will be working with you very tightly on that, because together I think we can do even more.
Yes.
You know, so these caregiver initiatives are so very important, because actually still till this date there isn't really any reimbursement available for the purpose of counseling people after a new diagnosis about how to manage their new condition. That's why philanthropy is so important, as we were talking about at the very beginning, because even if you're interested in having those kinds of programs, you can't mount them without philanthropic funds. It's amazing, but I don't think this has changed. You actually aren't permitted by Medicare rules to meet with the caregiver alone. That was the way it always was. I don't know if that's changed this yet.
The law just changed. Yep, it changed about 10 months ago, and that's now different.
But up until very recently, you literally could not have a meeting with the caregiver alone. It was not permitted for reimbursement. So we've really been hamstrung for years in order to try to do a better job.
So we know there are steps that individuals can take to change the destiny of their brain so that they are less likely to have a diagnosis of Alzheimer's or other dementia-related conditions. How good of a job are we doing in teaching the public about this and what needs to happen so that people will take charge of their own brain destiny? What needs to happen?
Well, I can start with that, because I can tell you that we think about this a lot. Are we ready as a community to start talking about brain health the way we did 40 years ago? We talked about cardiovascular health so broadly. I think Framingham, Dr. Seshadri, you know, that was really incredibly impactful in our learnings about heart health. And I think just now, as you're hearing from all of these experts, especially Dr. Kosik and Scarmeas, when they talked about brain health, we are finally getting the strong enough evidence to go out there and talk about this as a public health issue. And so I think that's what you're going to see. And you're going to see that, I think, in the coming decade, that it is the decade of brain health. And you'll see it being talked about, and you'll see more and more evidence, including our own from the US Pointer study, percolating out there and changing the way public health thinks, not just about cardiovascular health being good for your heart, but your heart runs everything. You know, your heart is good, but your brain runs everything in your body, not your heart. So that is going to be that next frontier. So I'm hopeful, but it has to be a public health message. We have to work with state and with federal governments in order to get that message out.
So we've heard a couple of times during our presentations that there's reason to be optimistic. Great researchers doing fantastic work. You're finding some clues, and it's great that everyone is coming together. It's through talking with each other. You never know where that incredible genius spark is going to come from the conversation. But we'd love to go down the path and hear from each of y'all about why you are optimistic and what is it that you're looking forward to. And so Dr. Lisa Schulman, if you could to talk about your optimism and where we are, because I think it's important, because if we have this fatalistic attitude as we go towards society, we know people tend to put their head in the sand and try to wither away. We need to let everyone know this can be beaten.
So I don't have the time that you have at the other end of the table to think this through, but actually I've been a neurologist caring for people with neurodegenerative diseases for 25 years, and I can say with all honesty that this is a time of more optimism than any time in the past. There are more fresh and innovative approaches to neurodegenerative disease by far than there ever have been before. And so, I have a lot of optimism in terms of some of these things coming to pass to really make a difference. Because if I go back to the early years of my career when I was participating in clinical trials, we were doing things that were much more kind of copycat kinds of stuff rather than real true innovation. The one note of caution, though, I would balance these comments with is that, we've heard so many things about what every one of us can do to reduce our risk and to delay, hopefully, progression of dementia and other neurodegenerative problems. And that requires people actually taking this to heart, being proactive, and implementing these things. Each of you on your own. And the truth is that up till now, that has not been the case. Even if you look at in the cardiac area, how many years we've known that cardiac rehabilitation and exercise is so important in that area, yet even there, the majority of cardiac patients are not participating in exercise and other healthy habits.
So, there are many elements of optimism. The major one is, it may sound strange, is that it's such a big problem that we have to succeed. And I think there's increasing realization of the magnitude of the problem, which means more people are involved and there's more pressure towards finding a solution. I will just give a couple of examples. They're relating to the discussion before. So sometimes we hear numbers and we don't have a sense unless we compare them. So the cost is close to, of Alzheimer's disease in the US, is close to 200 billion a year. Okay? So, and it will go to $1 trillion, as Maria said. So this was the cost of the war in Iraq. So in a few years, in 2050, where the projection referred to, if it's the case, it would cost us 5 wars like the war in Iraq. So imagine the country having 5 armies fighting at 5 different places in the world. So, and it's a bigger issue in developing countries because the population there is young and there's higher life expectancy, more and more, and they do not have the infrastructure to deal with that. So, and Alzheimer's disease costs more than cardiovascular disease and cancer together. These things are becoming more, we are becoming more and more aware, and so there's a big demand from society, and that translates into effort, and more scientists are being recruited into this aspect of neuroscience, trying to find a solution, and there's more public health effort. So Maria can talk to the Alzheimer's Association being successful in increasing the funding considerably about this disease relatively recently, and this can certainly give a boost towards this direction. It's a difficult problem. For example, there was a lot of success, let's say, in HIV. I don't want to minimize it, but it's a virus and we needed to find the right cocktail of antibiotics to kill it. But neurodegenerative diseases are very much linked with aging, so biologically speaking, and also there are many aspects in that, many different pathologies in the brain. So it's a difficult, biologically speaking, problem. But I think given the realization of the magnitude of the problem and the collective effort, we see, this conference is an example, many scientists from all over the world working together. In the past, it was more individually driven research. Now it's all consortia and collaborations, and this also can definitely boost our ability to deal with it.
Thank you, and it's a great question. I'm optimistic for many reasons, but I'll keep it short because we've got a long way to go on this line. But I think first and foremost, it's important to remember that for decades, Alzheimer's and related dementias at the federal level, and our federal government is the largest funder of Alzheimer's and related dementias in the world. And it was only funded to $450 million measly dollars a year, okay, until 5 years ago. That, imagine that. You heard from, I think, President Henrich, that I think 40 million has been raised for an endowment here to work at the bigs. So imagine what that can do in a few years, but imagine that we lived in Alzheimer's research funding with only 450 to give to all of the researchers around the United States. That is nothing. We were starving for dollars. And so innovation, out of the question, right? You have no money, what do? You fund conservative ideas over and over because you're afraid to go wrong. You have no money. Today, we have almost $2.4 billion a year going to Alzheimer's and related dementias. That will change things forever. It's going to change. We need to give it time. I know it's not going to happen tomorrow. It may not be next year. That happened for cancer. It happened for heart disease. It happened for HIV/AIDS. And over time, death rates have been going down for those diseases. That's fabulous. We may not have cured everything, and we may still be at an increased risk for cardiovascular disease, but we've reduced our risk dramatically, even if half the population only follows those things. I understand that those are still things that happen. But knowing about that for heart health and brain health is going to change the game. I'm really excited about the fact that we're recognizing that lifestyle is a huge contributor to your brain health. That's finally come and have its day. In the future, I think we'll be treating dementia broadly, maybe not all dementias, but dementia broadly, including Alzheimer's, in a combination therapy approach that includes lifestyle and pharmacological approaches, because we've done it and successfully for other diseases, and I think we will have our day as well. That's what I'm excited about, and I think we're going to have blood-based markers in the near future that are going to be able to help us determine who's on that path so that we can start early and say, hey, we're going to be able to treat this as a manageable disease, not as something that's going to get to dementia. So we'll decrease your risk of dementia by doing X, Y, Z that include lifestyle and combination of pharmacological therapies. So I'm excited. I think that day is coming.
The reason I'm optimistic, thank you, Maria. The reason I am optimistic is because I look at the way this country conducted the war on cancer. And although that money has been questioned about the utility of it, it brought us today, just as Maria said, a decline in the death rates of cancer. But more importantly than that, we now have a very fundamental understanding of cancer. The cell biology of cancer. We understand why in detail, with all the genes and enzymes involved, why cells will proliferate uncontrollably. And that all came from the funding that went into it. And what's coming out of it are the therapies that are beginning to make big inroads in the cancer problem. Today, we understand very little about Alzheimer's disease. We understand very little about the fundamental cell biology, very little about why a cell dies. We know why they proliferate. We don't know why they die. So the reason that I am optimistic is because now, with the funding that we're talking about, we are going to be able to start to do the fundamental biology, the cell biology, the molecular biology that's needed to generate real treatments that are grounded in science. And that is that's where the cure is going to come from, in my opinion.
So on top of a better understanding and having more technologies and having a lot of advances in cardiovascular, cancer, genomics, all that, I'm very optimistic because now people with dementia has a voice. Caregivers have a voice. People in front are not the scientists, are the people that deeply care about this. And we need you on our side. We need the inspiration. We need your voice. Because this is not a construct. This is very tangible. And so I'm very optimistic because I'm seeing you here. And you represent the voice of many who never had the chance to tell us about. 20 years ago, we have to almost extract the information, and the stigma prevent people even saying that have a person, a loved one with Alzheimer's.
Transformational changes in Alzheimer's and neurodegenerative diseases are unlikely to come from one investigator or one institution. It's likely to come from team science, teams of investigators and teams of universities and institutions across the world. And optimism is a great force multiplier.
It's a bit like Thanksgiving, going around the table saying what everyone's grateful for. And it's hard to talk or add to what's been said already, but I'm optimistic because people are listening, the feds are listening, patients are listening, families are listening, you're listening, everybody's engaged. You put together in San Antonio in record time this institute with all of its promise and all of its components. You have a city where your first responders are already learning to deal with dementia patients. You're ahead of the curve as far as I can tell, so that's why I'm optimistic.
Well, I'm at the point of saying ditto to all that. But I've been in Alzheimer's research for 50 years and I've seen a lot of things, a lot of disappointment and a lot of things that didn't make it. And we had, as was said earlier, we had very little resources to do research. The thing that really makes me excited, more excited now than ever in this, is that we've got all those things that we were talking about, and now we've got funds to do things. A few years ago, when the NIH was funding it, it was such a low level that we couldn't find something that was high risk or highly innovative, like imaging, like who believed, well, it's just probably not going to work. We can't fund an imaging project for looking at amyloid. So Alzheimer's Association did fund it, and now we can image tau and amyloid proteins. Major breakthrough, but it was a high risk project. Now we have money to do those kinds of research. And the other thing that was already mentioned is multidisciplinary research. And that's what we've got at this conference here. We got people from bioengineering, cell biology, molecular biology, public health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as somebody else already said, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take multidisciplinary approaches to solve this. And we're going to do it now.
So I'd like to thank David for a very exciting panel discussion and all the panelists. And I'd like to tell you what makes me optimistic. It's the great team we have. I invite our faculty and staff to come forward here. We are doing many of the things you're talking about in terms of research and care. But you heard about the many challenges as well as the many opportunities. You heard how we need funding, and we have a number of grants from the NIH. But the most exciting ideas, it's hard, you need seed money. And NIH funding goes up and down. So you need sustaining money as well. So we have a great team this year, but there's much more to be done. And I'd like to close with a very exciting announcement, which is part of the reason that makes me optimistic. We don't just have our team of researchers and clinicians. We have you, the patients. We have you, the care partners. And we have the generous philanthropists. When I was fortunate enough to be recruited to San Antonio, President Henrich asked me to share my vision and what I would like to accomplish. And I said, I think dementia is not all one disease. It's a very complicated thing, and each person has a different reason they have dementia in terms of their genetics, in terms of their life, and this is something everybody agrees with. And so we need precise prevention, we need precise diagnosis, and we need precision therapies. And care, this is not well funded, but we need more efficient, better ways of understanding the patients. We don't just need to understand, give a patient a diagnosis, a label, but we need to understand them from their first stage of being worried right up to palliative care. So we like to have really specialized palliative care. So it gives me great joy to announce today that Bill and Rebecca Reed, who are here with us today, embrace that vision and have invested a gift of $1 million to launch this leading edge program. A center for precision therapies and palliative care that will begin to do the pilot work, translating into other grants. And I thank them for their leadership. I thank them for their trust. It's a really privilege to have your trust and support. And we will work very hard to honor it, to make those discoveries that take us forward, not just here in San Antonio, but in the world. And they've also committed very generous future support to see it continue and grow in perpetuity through the good funding times and the not so good times. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank them for their extraordinary vision and generosity. And on this optimistic note, I'd like to bring today to a close. Thank you.
And then everybody see my gal. Turned up left, turned down flasher, yes sir, one of those. And everybody see my gal. If you run into 5'2", covered with fur, diamond rings and all those things that you like. She loves, could she move? Could she, could she, could she, could anybody see my gal?